Hi friends, this is Joe. This is episode number 170 of the Decahedron RPG podcast. If you've been following the numbering, you'll say, wasn't last episode 173 or something? And that's because I skipped 170 because James and I had sat down and recorded a test combat of Tunnels and Trolls, but there were problems with the recordings and I thought I could save it, and in the end I couldn't. So I'm going to use this for episode number 170, and James and I are going to re-record that. So, what's this episode about? So, I'm leaving the realms of fantasy. I'm going into my other favorite role-playing genre, which is science fiction, space opera, space science fiction. Science fiction is too broad an umbrella, right? That could cover things like X-Files or cyberpunk. There's a lot of things that come under the science fiction umbrella, but what I'm talking about specifically is your space opera type games, games like in the Star Trek universe or the Star Wars universe or the Babylon 5 universe, Farscape. Ooh, what was the one that everyone raves about? Serenity, Firefly. Any of those. That is my second favorite genre. Actually, I think it's even my favorite genre to play. None of those universes. I like making my own. But anyway, I'm going to talk about 5 different ways to do star maps in those universes. And because gaming is gaming, most of these are also ways to do maps in a fantasy game. Because if you think about it, the star travel, the space travel in a space game is like the wilderness travel in a fantasy game, and the various planets and asteroids and space bases, star bases, whatever, in deep space, they're like your cities and your villages and your towns of the fantasy game. So a lot of these can transfer over from space to fantasy, depending how you're going to set up your campaign. All right, so that's the intro. I'm at 6.25 miles right now, so I'm going to hit the road and do some more miles. I'll set up somewhere else and talk about the first step. See you there. Hi, friends. Some swans found me. This is kind of cool, actually. My wife loves swans. I don't know if you can see them on camera. Maybe if I go this way a little bit. I'm not going to get too close because I don't want to bother them. So the first kind of map I'm going to talk about is the simple hex map. It's the one that was used in Traveler, the first of the spacefaring RPGs, if you will. And they used the simple hex map. In their hex map, every hex was 1 parsec. And to travel from one hex to another, you'd have to go to the ones in between. Maybe jump space was weird. And if you think about it, this one makes sense, right? Because Traveler is really early in the beginning of the hobby, and all they're really doing is lifting the hex map that D&D was using for Wilderness Adventures. And D&D, that wasn't original. It lifted it from Outdoor Survival. And Outdoor Survival probably lifted it, going all the way back to 1961 with all of Avalon Hill's board games. Yeah, the hex map is the first one. And a problem, a so-called problem, I don't think it's really much of a problem, is that it's two-dimensional. Right? If you've ever listened to Roleplay Rescue by Shea Webster, and if you haven't, you should. It's a really great podcast. But this is what I would call cinematic reality, right? You're hand-waving the three-dimensionality to make the game easier and more fun and faster and, concentrate on the fun part of playing. Shea Webster doesn't like that, right? He doesn't like cinematic reality. He likes real reality. And so for that reason, he's not alone, a whole lot of other people, like the people that were heavily on the simulationist side of the GNS triangle, they don't like this technique. And so for them, we're going to talk about the next technique. See you when I get there. The next one, for those who like simulation, more likely to like this. So this is just a square grid, using normal graph paper like you would use to map out a dungeon. And instead of putting the stars in the squares and the blanks, you put them on the vertices, the intersections, the corners, whatever you want to call them. And next to each star, you put +7 or -3, whatever, however that star sits in relation to the galactic plane. So if it's above the galactic plane, you put +7. If it's below it, you put -3 or -4, however far down it is. Very realistic. You could map the universe like this for real. So people like Shay, and again, like I said, if you're not listening to Roleplay Rescue, give it a listen. You'll probably like it. They would probably like this better. And indeed, other than Traveller, this was used for like all the big space games back in the day. Fantasy Game Unlimited, Space Opera, and SPI's Universe, and SCURP Space. You know, they all use this grid system. Fasta Star Trek. Yeah, it was the standard. What I don't like about it is that it adds complication and disintuitiveness. Is that a word? It is now. I made it up. Let's say you're at planet A and you want to go to planet B. How far away is that? Well, that's the quantity of XA minus XB squared plus the quantity of YA minus YB squared plus the quantity of ZA minus ZB squared. Take all that, take the square root of that, and that's the distance. Who needs a role-playing game? We could just sit around and do geometry homework, right? And that's just, I don't see the attraction in that, not even a little bit. And hey, Shay, if you love it, I'm glad you love it. But yeah, for me, it's not my thing. The other thing, because I've used the system before, right? The other thing I found is that players look at the map and they ignore the Z levels. They just see what is closest to what, because that is what we are used to. That is our umwelt as players. I have a whole episode coming up about player umwelt. But that is what we are used to when we look at a map. And so, again, using my planet A and B example, so let's add a third planet, planet C. And you look on the map, planet A and planet C are right next to each other, and planet B is like 4 hexes away from planet A. And so the players think intuitively, planet C is closer. But it's not, because the difference in the Z level is a lot. And without doing that calculation, you can't see that, oh, it's actually a lot further away than planet B, which looks closer on the map. And to me, that's the whole point of a map, is to look at it and to intuitively understand what's close, what's far, and what's near each other relatively. So that is the square grid method. I'm not a big fan, but like I said, it was huge. All those games used it back in the 80s, and a lot of people liked it. So who am I to say that it doesn't work? As for using it for fantasy, there's really no need, because most fantasy maps only exist on 2-dimensional now. I suppose if you had cloud cities and you went from them one to another on Pegasi, it would be useful. And how cool would that be? It's a little power gamey for my taste. It's a little very high fantasy, but you gotta admit, it's kind of cool. All right, so the third one I want to talk about is, I call it the London Tube map. If you've ever been to London, actually, even if you haven't, you are probably seeing the map of the London Underground, their subway, the tube, because it is iconic. It is a piece of graphic design that is literally taught in textbooks, because the guy that made it had this brilliant idea of, why do I have to make the map look like the city? I just need to know what connects to what. People don't need to know like how it really runs through the city. I don't have to show every curve and turn and twist. I just show Paddington Station, some other station. I had one in mind and it went out of my head. Baker Street. I've been in the Baker Street station. I think I've been in the Paddington Station. Anyway, I don't know if they're on the same line though. That's not what this is about. But yeah, all you have to know is how they connect and how to get from one to the other. Oh, I take this line until I get to that station, and then I hop on the other line and I go up there. You can do the same thing with star systems. And you just map out all your stars willy-nilly and just connect them with lines. I want this one to connect that one to connect with this one. If you want a method of doing it, roll some dice. The way I personally do it when I'm doing this is I decide how many systems I want, not systems, how many spaces I want in the universe, because I like some empty ones, kind of like the empty room in D&D. But I just put them on the map, and then I say, number 1 has a 50% chance to be connected to number 2, and a 25% chance to be connected to number 3, and a 10% chance to be connected to number 4. And then number 2 has a 50% chance to be connected to number 3, and a 25% chance to be connected to number 4, and a 10% chance to be connected to number 5, etc. for the whole thing. And then at the very end, I like to kind of like loop it around so that the very last space has a chance of connecting to one of the ones in the beginning, and so it makes like this big loop. And often I end up with a connection or two in the middle, so it looks like maybe like a figure 8 type thing, and that can make for some tactical choices and stuff. When you want to lay all this out, if you're a geek like me, and admit it, you're at least a little bit of a geek, or you wouldn't be listening to a role-playing podcast, right? There is this program called GraphViz, and it's made to make flowcharts and graphs from text. So you just say A, line B, A dash dash B, A dash dash C, and that makes a node called A and connects it to B and connects it to C. And so you just do that, and it will lay it all out for you, and the exact shape doesn't matter because it's a logical map, not a physical map. And as I'm talking, it dawns on me that although I've said I've used it and I've not seen it elsewhere, in fantasy, it dawns on me that this is actually the layout of a point crawl, isn't it? For those GMs that like to have exploration, but they don't like the hex by hex exploration where characters actually explore. They want to like speed it up, and then you just move from point of interest to point of interest. This is actually the same thing. I came up with this system way back in the 90s. I don't know when point crawls became a thing, but who cares? So that is the third system, what I call the London Tube system, or the London Underground system. Okay, so the fourth system I want to talk about is what I call the Robinsport Chase flowchart, or the Indiana Jones Chase flowchart. I was introduced to this in the old D&D module DA4, which was the Duchy of 10, and in there they have this town called Robinsport, and they showed the system for exploring the town and for conducting chases in the town. I thought it was pretty cool, but later I turned out that TSR actually stole this from one of their earlier products, which was the Indiana Jones adventure game. And and have you ever heard of the Diana Jones Awards? That actually came from the Indiana Jones game. Long story, another podcast maybe. Yeah, and all this is you lay out your city as a grid of nodes. They used 5 by 5. If I were using this for a star system, I would do 10 by 10. And all you say is that this node is connected to the one to its left and the one to its right. And this other node is connected to the one to its right and the one below it. And this one, you just do that all over. And if you want to do this randomly, just lay out your grid, go like 10 by 10 and, start in the upper right and do a 1 in 8 chance that you're connected to each of those stars. And if one has no connection at all, re-roll it until you have at least one for each system, or just make that one unobtainable and come up with some really neat little in-universe lore. And just like I was saying for the London Tube system, each node does not need to contain a star system. I like to have some empty systems, and so there's no star system in this one. You just pass through to the next one, or if your ship doesn't have enough fuel, that creates blockers, and you have to find other ways around. As for using that one for fantasy, like I said, it's already used in module DA4, the Duchy of 10. So go out, find that module, look at the way they use it. They use it for cities in D&D, and it is the way I will probably do cities in the future, if I were to do cities that way at all. Generally, in city adventures, I hand wave everything. We want to go to the tavern. Okay, you go to the tavern. I don't say, okay, well, you walk down this street and you pass a butcher, and you walk down that street and you pass a tailor. I don't do that. I just say, you go to the tavern. But that's me. I guess that's what a lot of people do with wilderness adventures, where I play out that one. Yeah, people are different. Go figure. Yeah, so that is the Robinsport or the Indiana Jones system. And finally, the fifth system is what I call the Astral Web system. And I used this in my Astral Web campaign years ago, back in the 90s. And what it is you use hex paper, I guess you could say kind of like the Traveler system, but instead of mapping in the spaces, you map the stars on the vertices, or the corners, the intersections, whatever you want to call them, kind of like in the 3D map system, but there is no 3D-ness. And what it is when you look at the hex paper, you have the line that connects each corner to each corner, right? And your ship can only travel along those lines. They're like naturally occurring wormholes or stargates or stable hyperspace conduits. In fact, that logic follows for all the systems I've mentioned except for the 3D space one. You have to come up with that kind of rationale behind it. Yeah, so each system only has 3 other systems that it can connect to. But anyway, you just map it in a 2D map on the intersections there, and you put star systems where you want them, and you jump from each to each along the lines of the hexes, or if you will, go along the strands of the web, which is why I named it that. Now, I get really technical when I do this one, right? I say towards the top of the map is, you have to set your drive with positive polarity, and going towards the negative, the bottom of the map, you set it towards the negative polarity. And if you don't set any polarity at all, that's when you travel left or right, depending which direction has a connection on that space. I really like this one. It is just funky enough to make it unique. It's easy for players to grasp and understand. It's fun, and that's what I look for in a role-playing game, is fun. All right, I know I said 5, but here's a bonus one, and it's kind of a cheat, which is why I didn't want to count it. Have you ever read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or maybe saw the movie? Remember the Heart of Gold, the ship that Zaphod Beeblebrox steals in its infinite improbability drive? That drive allows the ship to go anywhere in the universe instantaneously. So this is like a hyper-connected universe. Imagine a society where that is the normal way of space travel, where every ship does this instant transport to anywhere. Now, in GURPS Space, there is a paragraph about the different types of space drives you can use, the space warp and the hyperspace jump and things like that. And one of the things it says is that when you're jumping, things like borders become iffy, because you don't have to pass through this space to get from the space before it to the space after. You just kind of bypass it completely. This is like that, but cranked up to 11, right? You don't have to go through, and there's no such thing as borders at this point. Every part is connected to every part. And so if you have opposing sides, how do you conduct war like that, right? You can't amass your fleet here to stop them, because they don't need to go there. They can go here. And so your fleet has to be spread out, protecting all your planets. But if your fleet is all spread out, all they have to do is say, okay, on April 7th at 7 p.m., we're all going to jump into Friendly Space Prime. And their entire fleet jumps there and decimates that planet. But, of course, you have that same option, so maybe it becomes like this Cold War, this mutually assured destruction thing. It is a fun little thought experiment. It might make a fun little computer game. Yeah, maybe this needs an episode all to its own. There's the way that would shape a society and stuff, I think is interesting. But yeah, that's a bonus. As for using it for like D&D, imagine a system where every city has a portal, and the portal connects to any other portal. It's interesting. Although at least then you could set up, you could guard at the portal, I guess. But so that's it. That is 5 systems plus a bonus to map your science fiction universe. What do you think? Do you like them? Which one do you like the best? I like the Astral Web. I like the London Tube one. The more I think about it, the Robinsport one is really a modification of the London Tube one, right? Because it's still a logical map as opposed to a physical map. Although I suppose it could be a physical map if you say that's the way the the star grids, the stargates are aligned. Maybe. I like the Traveler Parsec one. I'd put that into like second to last place though, because I like these other ones that much more. And the very last is the 3D space, because I don't want to mess with trigonometry around the gaming table. But hey, that's me. What do you like? Thanks for watching and or listening. And until next time, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.